And vitamin K2 is really important for keeping the calcium out of your arteries and putting it into your bones where it belongs.
I don't think most people are hitting the requirements for vitamin K2, and vitamin K2 is the only vitamin that's proven to be able to show arteriosclerosis reversal and scavenging plaque out of the arteries.
And K2 is also important because it regulates things like cardiovascular function, calcium in the body, and so on.
Without vitamin K2, you end up with plaquing, calcium plaquing in the arteries.
So by making sure that we've got healthy levels of vitamin K2, we're switching on these GLA proteins. We're making sure that our blood vessels are healthy.
But there's another function of vitamin K, and that function is involved in pulling calcium out of the blood vessels and arteries and bringing it to places where it should be, like the bones and muscle and other organs. Calcium is an important signaling molecule in many pathways. So these proteins that pull calcium out of the vascular system are also activated by vitamin K. But that's not really an essential function for short-term survival. I mean, you can have calcium build up in your blood vessels and arteries and be just fine for several decades. But calcification of the blood vessels does lead to cardiovascular diseases. In fact, calcification of the arteries is associated with a fourfold increased risk of cardiovascular disease and atherosclerosis. It also increases vascular dementia because it's cutting off blood flow to the brain.
Hey everyone, this is Kevin Bass from thedietwars.com, and I am going to talk to you guys today about why vitamin K supplements might be dangerous and might cause heart attacks. First, I'm going to introduce myself. I'm an MD PhD student. I've done the first 2 years of medical training. That is to say, I've done the first 2 preclinical years. I've learned the basic sciences of medicine. I have the last 2 years to go. During the last 2 years, one learns clinical care, how to apply that basic science knowledge to the care of patients. And often these are entirely 2 different skill sets. The preclinical simply teaches you about the theories, and then the clinical is how do things actually work. I've also done much of a PhD. I have 1 more year left to graduate with my PhD, and then again 2 years left for the MD. So I'm at the tail end of my MD PhD program. And during the time I've been doing the MD PhD, I've become progressively more interested in misinformation online. And that's because if we want to solve problems in health and in public health, we have to agree about them. If we can't agree about what reality is, then we can't make policy. Because without agreeing on reality, nobody's going to agree on what policy we should have, and there's going to be a lot of noise and conflict over what policy we have because nobody can agree on what we actually need to do because nobody can agree what the facts are. Therefore, I became increasingly interested in misinformation due to my time on the internet, communicating health information, and seeing the rampant misinformation being promoted by people who don't seem to have the best interests of the public at heart. I've recently become interested in vitamin K misinformation. In particular, there are now very strong claims being made about the ability, the effectiveness of vitamin K for preventing and even reversing heart disease. I've just shown a bunch of clips of major influencers pushing this view about vitamin K. This view, promulgated widely, could turn out to be extremely dangerous. This view is not based on good science. It's based on preclinical data and sketchy and quite uncertain randomized control trial data. By good science, I mean it's not based on rigorous, long-term, randomized controlled trials looking at hard outcomes. The claims about vitamin K being made, which are often being made by people with affiliations with companies selling vitamin K, the claims about vitamin K being made are being made on the basis of this idea that vitamin K reduces calcification in the arteries and therefore reduces the buildup of plaque in the arteries. This view is extremely flawed and completely misunderstands how atherosclerosis develops. Before I further introduce these ideas and explain why this view is flawed, and in fact may even cause more atherosclerosis, that is to say, decalcification of the arteries via high doses of vitamin K may actually cause atherosclerosis, I want to provide some background on the several different treatments of the last several decades that have been proposed to help heart disease on the basis of mechanisms rather than hard data, and how these treatments turned out once they were actually finally put to the test. The first trial I want to talk about is called Mortality and Morbidity in Patients Receiving Incanide, Flecainide, or placebo. The Cardiac Arrhythmia Suppression Trial, or as we'll be calling it, the CAST trial. In the CAST trial, they decided to test whether a very commonly used practice among millions of patients over the prior decades of using anti-arrhythmics, that is to say, drugs that reduced the degree of arrhythmia and normalized the rhythm of the heart in patients who had recently had a heart attack and had arrhythmias as a result of their heart attack. This trial sought to test the idea that anti-arrhythmics, by normalizing the rhythm of the heart, could reduce risk to the heart from these arrhythmias. It seems reasonable, right? You have a normal rhythm in your heart. You have a heart attack. It causes an abnormal rhythm. The abnormal rhythm may be bad. Therefore, reduce the abnormal rhythm and make it a normal rhythm again using a drug. Seems straightforward, seems like it should work. You're making what's abnormal normal again. By making what's abnormal normal again, you are potentially reducing risk to the patient. This was standard practice for at least the decade leading up to this trial in millions of heart attack patients. In this trial, they took 1,500 patients and they assigned them to different groups, either receiving one of these anti-arrhythmics, and there's two in this trial, so one of two anti-arrhythmics, or a placebo. What they found, surprisingly, when they decided to test this theory after it had already been in clinical practice for over a decade, what they found was an excess of deaths due to arrhythmia and deaths due to shock after acute recurrent myocardial infarction in patients treated with the antiarrhythmic versus those treated with placebo. That is to say, more patients died when they were treated with the antiarrhythmics than when they were given a sugar pill. Again, I'll repeat, more patients died when they received the anti-arrhythmic drug that normalized the rhythms than when they received the sugar pill. And we can see very clearly in this figure this is a combined outcome of cardiac death or cardiac event. And it's very clear here in just a little over a year, there was an increase of 5% additional events in those treated with the antiarrhythmic versus those treated with the sugar pill. The relative risk of death or cardiac arrest due to arrhythmia was 2.64. That is to say, nearly a threefold higher chance of death or cardiac arrest due to arrhythmia in those treated with the drug. And the relative risk of death or cardiac arrest due to all causes was 2.38, which is a 2.3 times higher risk, more than twofold increase, more than a doubling of risk of death or cardiac arrest due to all causes if you're taking the drug. What this trial showed us was that you cannot, among other things, first of all, that these drugs increase the risk of death in heart attack survivors. And second, it's a bad idea to go from a mechanism, a plausible mechanism, to the inference of what an outcome should be without actually having the randomized controlled trial data. And the parallel with vitamin K should be clear. We do not have the randomized controlled trial data for vitamin K and coronary heart disease. We do not have that data. It could be the case that vitamin K could increase the risk of death from heart disease, even though the mechanism sounds plausible on face, and I'll show in a moment that it's not plausible on face. Actually, that's wrong. But even if it seems plausible on face, it could still be harmful. And I'm going to argue that there's a high chance that it is harmful. Let's talk about another trial, this time called homocysteine-lowering with folic acid and B vitamins in vascular disease. This is in 2006, and after many years of doctors believing, due to experimental evidence in animals and observational studies in humans, that homocysteine could raise the risk of heart disease, it was put to the test by giving patients folic acid, vitamins B6 and B12 to lower homocysteine levels if they had had a previous heart attack in the previous days. In HOPE 2, they did not see any difference despite a large decrease in homocysteine. They did not see any difference in mortality or heart attacks when homocysteine was lowered versus no treatment given. And in another trial published on exactly the same day in the same journal, with much the same design, there was even a suggestion that there could be an increased risk of having another heart attack. The opposite of what was anticipated by the theory. This is called mechanistic plausibility, and basing recommendations around mechanistic plausibility might be called mechanistic speculation or a mechanistic speculative recommendation. But in any case, it's a mechanistic, theoretical, based on uncertain, preclinical, non-randomized control trial data on which one is basing one's recommendations. And this is inappropriate. It was shown to be wrong as well for homocysteine and perhaps also even harmful for homocysteine. The parallels for vitamin K and its mechanistic speculative recommendations are striking, as are the implications. Let's look at another set of studies, and this one is a meta-analysis of many different antioxidants. It found much the same thing. When you look at all of the randomized controlled trials available, and in this case, there were 300,000 participants included in the final analyses, there was no benefit for vitamin A, vitamin B6, vitamin B12, vitamin C, vitamin D, vitamin E, beta-carotene, folic acid, or selenium. All of those vitamin supplements produced zero benefit for cardiovascular disease, despite there being tremendous hype for vitamin C and vitamin E in particular, and for the same reasons as the homocysteine story for vitamin B12, vitamin B6. There was also no difference for beta-carotene, vitamin A, for similar reasons as for the vitamin E and vitamin C. They're antioxidants. One of the theories at the time was that oxidation of LDL cholesterol makes it more atherogenic, more prone to causing atherosclerosis, heart disease, and therefore eventually heart attacks. Yet, when you test this theory and you give people antioxidants to lower the oxidation of these lipoproteins, LDL cholesterol containing lipoproteins, you see zero benefit, showing that this is just a plausible theory that one has derived in the lab, which may be true, but in this case is shown not to be, and not helpful at all. And this study is called, for the listeners, Efficacy of Vitamin and Antioxidant Supplements in Prevention of Cardiovascular Disease, Systematic Review and Meta-Analysis of Randomized Controlled Trials, British Medical Journal, 2013. First author is Myung, M-Y-U-N-G. Let's continue. CETP CETP inhibitors. CETP. CETP inhibitors, that stands for cholesterol ester transfer protein inhibitor. These drugs increased HDL cholesterol, and by increasing HDL cholesterol, predominantly by increasing HDL cholesterol, it was thought you would prevent heart disease. Why? Because one of the most robust and strong associations with heart disease in the observational literature is HDL. HDL is inversely associated with heart disease. The higher the HDL, the lower the risk of heart disease. What happened with the CETP inhibitors, which increase HDL? Well, in 2006, torcetrapib failed due to excess deaths in the group treated with the drug. Again, this is a story we keep hearing repeated. Good theory causes more people to die. May 2012, dalcetrapib, and in 2015, evatrapib, two more CETP inhibitors, both failed to show efficacy. Same thing with obicetrapib. Now, there is another one called anacetrapib, anacetrapib, and the REVEAL trial showed a benefit. This is probably due to the fact that it, more than the others, reduces LDL cholesterol. But what this shows is that theories, and in this case, HDL, is supposed to take cholesterol from the arteries and return it to the liver, thereby reducing the plaque burden in the arteries and reducing atherosclerosis, in accordance with the data, that the observational data consistent with that inverse relationship between heart disease and HDL levels. This theory is not necessarily borne out in practice, and in fact can cause more harm than good. And this happens over and over and over. Let's now get to vitamin K. It is bandied about on the internet by everybody and their mother. Everybody and the mother. It sounds like all the biggest influencers push it, push it, push it. And we saw that in the videos at the beginning. Let's check that out again. These influencers want us to believe that this is a good supplement for our heart. They often are making money with each supplement that's sold if you click on their link. There's a few problems. First of all, this systematic review of controlled trials called Vitamin K Supplementation for the Prevention of Cardiovascular Disease, Where is the Evidence? A systematic review of controlled trials published in Nutrients 2020 showed that the evidence for reduction of calcification in the arteries is weak and inconsistent. Some trials suggest an effect, some trials don't. There's no good evidence that there's an effect. And certainly there are no large randomized controlled trials showing an effect. There's this randomized controlled trial published in 2022, this year, about a month ago, in 365 men, so rather large. This showed no effect on aortic valve calcification. Again, no effect. So this is one of the best studies done. It was published in Circulation, which is in the American Heart Association journal. No effect. Okay, but let's assume it does have an effect and it does reduce calcification. That is to say, vitamin K supplementation reduces calcification, reduces calcium in the arteries, thereby reducing heart disease. It takes the calcium away from the arteries where it doesn't belong. Let's say that that's true. Is that even a good thing? Maybe that can cause heart attacks. Why? First bit of evidence. Let's talk about the relationship between physical activity and progression of coronary artery calcification. In fact, that is the title of a publication in Heart, which is a journal in the British Medical Journal family. Let's just read the conclusion. And this is shown in very many studies at this point, that there is a positive graded association, meaning, well, we'll talk about it in a second, a positive graded association between physical activity and the prevalence and progression of coronary artery calcification, regardless of baseline coronary artery calcification scores. That is to say, the more physical exercise, the more coronary artery calcification. That's despite the fact that the more exercise, the lower the risk of heart attack. The more calcium, the lower the risk of heart attack. Isn't that interesting? Another article in JAMA Cardiology, Journal of the American Medical Association Cardiology, called Association of All-Cause and Cardiovascular Mortality with High Levels of Physical Activity and Concurrent Coronary Artery Calcification, concluded, in highly active individuals with elevated levels of coronary artery calcification, it appears that there is no evidence to suggest increased mortality risk from high levels of physical activity. It says, this study suggests there is evidence that high levels of physical activity are associated with prevalent coronary artery calcification, but are not associated with increased all-cause or cardiovascular mortality after a decade of follow-up, even in the presence of clinically significant coronary artery calcification levels. This review of the complexity of the use of coronary artery calcium scoring points out, and I'll just read here, statins stabilize plaque and reduce risk of subsequent events. However, their use increases, at least in the short term, the rate of progression of the coronary artery calcium score. A key mechanism by which this paradox occurs is by increasing calcified plaque density. More densely calcified plaques are less prone to rupture, resulting in a lower risk of coronary events compared with less calcified ones at any level of calcified plaque volume. That's interesting because if you take vitamin K, which decalcifies plaques, especially if you're taking hyperphysiological doses of vitamin K, and with this Thorne supplement of vitamin K, it's given 15 milligrams, which is 12,500% of vitamin K intake requirements. If you're getting such doses to decalcify plaques, which is the opposite of what statins do, which increases calcium to stabilize plaques, what is going to be the outcome? Is a hyperphysiological dose of vitamin K going to destabilize plaques and cause heart attacks according to the current understanding of how cardiovascular disease works. Because here's how it actually works. Plaques are the response to injury. They're not the cause of injury. Sorry. Calcified plaques are the response to injury. They're not the cause of injury. The plaques start from a lipid core caused by LDL cholesterol, which then creates a lesion, which is then sealed over, so to speak, by a plaque. Plaques happen, calcification in the body happens in general as a result of the healing process. And this is shown in this really cool image where a deer got shot by an arrow and it used the arrow to heal its own ribs. This is not entirely accurate, but what happens around any injury, what happens around any foreign body is that calcium will surround it to protect it, fence it off from the rest of the body. If you reduce this fence, what happens? Are you going to destabilize the plaque or help the plaque? I believe you'll destabilize the plaque, and I believe that vitamin K supplements cause destabilization of the plaques and may increase heart attacks. So here's the outro for this video. First of all, I'm not saying that vitamin K is going to cause a heart attack. I don't know. I'm saying it's a plausible mechanistic outcome that it could cause heart attacks, and it might cause heart attacks. It might actually cause heart attacks to decalcify your calcified plaques, reduce your coronary artery calcification score, and destabilize your plaques and cause a heart attack. But it may not. This is why mechanistic speculation is unclear. Just because I have a mechanism, I think that it's going to, I think is going to happen as a result of this basic biological understanding doesn't mean that actually will, because there's only one aspect of biology, the decalcification of the plaques, but vitamin K has a bunch of other effects as well on biology, and these other effects could cause an improvement in cardiovascular disease risk. Or it could be the way that vitamin K decalcifies plaques is not harmful. What we can say is there's no evidence, I think, almost at all, that any sort of decalcification drug or process has ever improved cardiovascular disease risk in a rigorous randomized controlled trial. Yeah, we have lots of observational studies, lots of animal studies. But again, those are the same sorts of studies that we thought that things like homocysteine reduction would help, that we thought things like antioxidants would help, that we thought things like HDL increases through CETP inhibitors would help. And it showed all to be wrong. It's not good, it's terrible evidence. And generally speaking, as we've seen in other videos, there's a video called Misinformation Dominates, Health Misinformation Dominates on social media. And in that video, as we saw, overwhelmingly, drugs based on this sort of weak evidence that go into randomized controlled trials, overwhelmingly they don't work. And this is a perfect illustration of the fact all these cardiovascular disease, these very famous examples of cardiovascular disease interventions that were shown not to work. Very hyped, some of the biggest ones ever. Very hyped, all shown not to work, and maybe in some cases cause harm. Maybe in most cases cause harm, despite seeming to be helpful, according to the mechanistic plausibility. But my mechanistic plausibility that you're going to get a heart attack as a result of vitamin K supplementation may not be true either. It needs to also be tested by randomized controlled trials. We actually need evidence. But there's reason to believe, based on what we know about atherosclerotic progression, that it could cause more heart attacks. Is that a risk you want to take? So systematically in this industry, health and diet and fitness industry, mechanistic plausibility is used to derive and extrapolate to recommendations that are not based on evidence that your doctor's never going to make, that gives these people a chance to find a niche online to say something new, but in many cases potentially harmful. And in this case, I think there's a high likelihood that it's harmful. And I think I see a stronger case for vitamin K hyperphysiological supplementation causing more disease than I see a case for it causing a reduction in risk. So that's the point. It's like, don't use this sort of mechanistic speculation to make recommendations. Actually run a study, please. But influencers don't run studies, right? They make money on YouTube videos and supplement lines and affiliate deals with Athletic Greens. That's what they do. All right, so if you liked this, if you thought this was interesting and cool, because this is the coolest stuff, there's nobody else who's doing the stuff that I'm doing. It's just the truth. Then, check me out on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. On Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, you can find me at Kevin in Bass, KVIN BASS. That's Kevin in Bass, 2 N's. You can find me on YouTube at KBass Philadelphia. You can find me on Patreon. Please donate on my Patreon if you think this is good work and you think that you want to help support it, because every bit helps a lot. If you could just give $5 a month, that makes a big difference to me. Huge difference, because if I get 50 people who do that, it's $250. And again, it's not like a huge amount of money, but it's enough. Like $250 a month, yeah, it's like that additional money makes a big difference. So if you're one of those 50 people, you've just made a big difference. So please, donate on Patreon. That'd be awesome. It would be much appreciated. Or on the other hand, you can also donate through my website at thedietwars.com/support-me. And you can donate directly through Square. I have a whole thing set up there that you can just immediately send money. And check out the podcast at The Kevin Bass Show. Find it on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts. Subscribe to my Apple Podcasts. Go into Apple Podcasts and click the subscribe button. Follow on Apple Podcasts and follow on Spotify. So subscribe on both of those. Meaning make it so that you can get constant updates, because that's going to help me rise in the rankings. So subscribe. Also do ratings and reviews. So the more reviews I get, more ratings is the better, because it entices other people to continue to check out my podcast. So higher ratings, better reviews, more people check things out. So if you like what I've said, or if you think it's interesting, give me at least 3 stars, at least if you think it's interesting. If you don't like it, you hate it, well, hopefully you still think it's interesting, and preferably you'll give me 5 stars, because I'm giving, again, information other people are not giving, and in ways, and I'm looking at things in a way that most people aren't looking at it, at least online. A real scientist looks at things this way, but there's not a lot of real scientists who are influencers. So help me out there. And then comment on the YouTube video. If you're on the YouTube, click subscribe on the YouTube as well. That'll help me too. Share the YouTube video and like it, of course, if you like it, because that helps a lot. It'll get the algorithm going. It'll get more shares. Again, everything will get helped. So you can donate. You can subscribe to my Apple Spotify, or YouTube channels. You can make a comment or you can share any of this stuff on social media. And all that stuff helps me a lot and is much appreciated. So, what else? Leave feedback. Let me know how I'm doing. If things are getting better, if you think things are getting better, if you think they're great, if you like what I'm doing, let me know. I would love to hear that I'm doing a great job. I would love to hear that you think I'm doing great. That makes me feel good. If you think there's something I can work on, let me know, because I want to work on that. If you think I'm a terrible person, etc., keep it to yourself. I'm going to block you off the channel. Just keep it to yourself. Don't click on my channel anymore. Don't come. If you don't like what I'm doing, don't come. You're going to get blocked if you leave a really nasty message. So, for everybody else who's supportive, that's awesome. I appreciate you guys. Much love. Much love. Much love to my fans. Oh, by the way, as part of the outro, guess what? I'm ranked this podcast is ranked number 5 in Ireland and number 6 in Spain in the categories of medicine. Isn't that cool? It's like, what? And I'm guessing in Ireland it has something to do with my last name, because my last name is Bass, right? So maybe they're like, oh yes, he's one of us, so we gotta listen to him. That's the only thing I can come up with. Because Spencer Nadolski is ranked in the top 20. He's like ranked way higher than me in America, but he's a Nadolski. In Ireland, they're like, oh, I don't know about this Nadolski guy. It's like, I think, what is that, a Czech name? But either way, like, that's funny. So for whatever reason, I'm number 5 in Ireland. I was number 6 yesterday. I've moved up a ranking, booyah. And I'm right up underneath Mark Hyman, who is the ranking number 1 or number 2, like everywhere. And in Spain, I'm ranked number 6. I can't explain that one, but I'm ranked number 6 in Spain too. So, booyah, Spain. Yeah, thank you, Spain. Thank you, Ireland, my fans. Maybe I'll go live over there someday if I can't break the top 10 in the United States, but that's funny. So, thank you, everybody, and I just wanted to share that funny tidbit with you. So, appreciate everything, appreciate you guys, and check out the next video if you think this was interesting. Peace.
And vitamin K2 is really important for keeping the calcium out of your arteries and putting it into your bones where it belongs.
I don't think most people are hitting the requirements for vitamin K2, and vitamin K2 is the only vitamin that's proven to be able to show arterial sclerosis reversal and scavenging plaque out of the arteries.
And K2 is also important because it regulates things like cardiovascular function, calcium in the body, and so on.
Without vitamin K2, you end up with calcium plaquing in the arteries.
So by making sure that we've got healthy levels of vitamin K2, we're switching on these GLA proteins. We're making sure that our blood vessels are healthy.
But there's another function of vitamin K, and that function is involved in pulling calcium out of the blood vessels and arteries and bringing it to places where it should be, like the bones and muscle and other organs. Calcium is an important signaling molecule in many pathways. So these proteins that pull calcium out of the vascular system are also activated by vitamin K. But that's not really an essential function for short-term survival. I mean, you can have calcium build up in your blood vessels and arteries and be just fine for several decades. But calcification of the blood vessels does lead to cardiovascular diseases. In fact, calcification of the arteries is associated with a 4-fold increased risk of cardiovascular disease and atherosclerosis. It also increases vascular dementia because it's cutting off blood flow to the brain.